All right, so today we're going to talk about area of a parallelogram. But before we get started, let's go ahead and talk about the parallelogram versus a rectangle and some of the things of how they're similar and how they're different. If you notice here, they're both four-sided figures. That's how they're the same. One has 4 right angles, and the other one has none, right? It's a slanted, it looks like a slanted rectangle, meaning it has 2 obtuse angles and 2 acute angles, okay? Well, in order to find a base and a height, you need to form a right angle. So it's really important when finding a base and a height. So here for your rectangle, your base and height are already easily set up because you have 4 right angles. Here in a parallelogram, we're going to actually have to go in and make that straight line. Because think about it. Remember, when you have your height has to be straight and tall. So your height is not necessarily on the edge. You have to go inside and find your height. You can never take a slanted line for your height. So your height is more along the inside, while your base can still be the bottom line, okay? Because it has to form that right angle. All right, so now let's look at an example of a parallelogram. And let's go ahead and let's count the base of this parallelogram. And you see here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so the base of this parallelogram is 8. And we'll put 8 units. So we'll put U for units. And the height, remember the height has to be the straight up and down. Remember, you have to have that right angle if you're going to have a base and a height. Is just 1, 2, 3 units. Okay? So we went ahead and we found both the base and the height of this parallelogram. Now, here, to find the area of a parallelogram, we're going to do the same thing as we would a rectangle. We're going to take our base, which is 8 units, and our height, which is 3 units, and 8 times 3 is 24, and units times units is units squared. So the area of this parallelogram is 24 units squared. Now let's turn this parallelogram into a rectangle. So really all I need to do is I need to move this piece over here to the other side and line it up. And I can see here now my parallelogram now has turned into a rectangle. And you notice I didn't lose any pieces. I still have the exact same amount of area as I did when this was a parallelogram. Okay, so let's now let's find the base of this rectangle. And the base of this rectangle is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The base didn't change. Even though I changed my parallelogram into a rectangle, it did not change. It was still 8 units. Okay, now let's go ahead and take our height. Now I can take the height right off the edge because it's a straight line. It forms that right angle with the base. So we have 1, 2, 3. So 3 units would be my height. Okay, well that's the exact same thing as the parallelogram, so that's why we calculate area the same way. Rectangles and area of a parallelograms, there's no difference in finding them. Because if you notice here when we smoothed it around, we did not take off any of the area. So that's why we can still do 8 units times 3 units, and our area is still 24 units squared. Okay, so let's try that again if, let's say, our parallelogram looks slightly different Doesn't necessarily look like the one before. Okay, let's go ahead and let's count our base. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is the same thing down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So really, because I know the bases are going to be congruent, I can take it from either the top or the bottom, but you definitely want to make sure that it's going to form that right angle. Okay, so here our base is 5 units. And let's go ahead and let's calculate the height. Remember, the height is that straight up and down line. So let's see what the height is. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 as well. So my height is also 5 for this parallelogram. Now, remember, to calculate area, we got to do our base times our height. So we're going to do 5 units times 5 units. And that gives me 5 times 5 is 25, and units times units is units squared. So the area of this parallelogram is 25 units squared. Now, let's check to see, again, when we move this parallelogram around, and let's turn it into a square. Or you can still even call this a rectangle, right? So we still want our base and height to form that right angle, right? So let's go ahead and let's calculate our base. And our base is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And our height didn't change as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Notice I didn't lose any pieces. Everything is still there. So even though this started off as a parallelogram and turned into a rectangle, the base and the height both still stayed 5 units. So the area is still going to be calculated the same way. 5 units times 5 units is going to give us 25 units squared. All right, now let's go ahead and let's look at an example of another parallelogram. Remember, our height and our base should always form that right angle. And we do see it here. We see that we have a base. I'm going to go ahead and label a base of 6 millimeters. And we have a height of 5 milliliters. So all we're going to do to find our area is do our base times our height. So we're going to do 6 millimeters times 5 millimeters. And 6 times 5 is 30. And millimeters times millimeters is going to be millimeters squared. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and just do a few more examples here. Remember, our base and our height should always form that right angle. So when given a picture that looks like this, we want to use our base still. So our base is still going to be 2. Our height is not going to be the 7, though. Our height is going to be the 5. Remember, because we want that straight line, that height. When you go to the doctor's office and you take your height, you stand nice and tall. So we're going to go ahead and do our base times height. And here our base is 2 meters. Our height is 5 meters. And our area altogether would be 10 meters squared. Okay? Same thing with this one. Remember, we don't want to take this slanted line. You do not want the height as your line, or the slanted line as your height. It has to be on the line, right? So here our base would be 11. And our height would be 7. So we're going to do our base times height. We're going to plug it into our formula. 11 meters times 7 meters is going to be 77 meters squared. All right, last one. Are we ready? All right, remember, we want our base and our height to make that right angle. So here our base would be 4 meters. And our height would be 16 meters. We do not want the 17. We do not want that slanted line as our height. No, cross it out. And then we want 16 meters for our height. And 4 times 16 is 64. And meters times meters is going to be meters squared.